Hello again. Something which never ceases to amaze me is that the real cause of enmity and ill feeling between Britain and France is never mentioned out loud. What's even weirder is hardly anybody in Britain or America seems to know about it. They don't know the reason for deep-seated French antipathy towards their countries. It's a very strange state of affairs, especially at the moment when Britain and France are at loggerheads over the post-Brexit trade deal and the flow of illegal immigrants from France to Britain across the English Channel. Okay, let's see, why is it never mentioned out loud, and why don't any of the people watching this know what I'm talking about? Between 1940 and 1945, a total of 60,595 people were killed in Britain by German missiles and bombs. It caused enormous anger. I mean, for decades after the war, people used to remember the Blitz with fury and, mutter things like, oh, bloody Krauts and so on. At least Germans apologised, and they did try to make amends afterward. And when all said and done, we were at war with them. We bombed their country as well. So that's all rather been forgotten now. In France, 8 times the amount of bombs, 8 times the weight of bombs was dropped on their country between 1940 and 44. And there too, over 60,000 of their citizens were killed. And the worst day for bombing in Britain was 10th of May 1941, when 1,436 Londoners were killed during bombing raids by Germany. In France, more than the worst day for the deaths from bombs was twice as bad as that. On 27th of May 1944, 3,012 French people were killed by bombs. The only difference is that whereas Britain was being bombed by Germany, with whom we were at war, in France, the people being killed by the bombing were being killed by their allies. They were being killed by British and American bombs. Have a look at this photograph. And no, it's not Hiroshima after the atomic bomb had been dropped either. This is actually the French port of Le Havre. On the 5th of September 1944, a few months after D-Day, 350 British bombers flew over Le Havre, dropping a deadly combination of high explosive bombs and also an awful lot of incendiaries, 30,000 incendiaries in fact. The following day, 6 waves of bombers flew over Le Havre and they dropped 1,500 tons of bombs and another 12,500 incendiaries. In all, about 5,000 people were killed. Let's look again at what was left of the town after that ferocious assault. What's strange is that nobody really wants to talk about actions like the bombing of Le Havre. They seem to have faded entirely from collective memory. I mean, they haven't faded from French memory, they've faded from the British and American memory for obvious reasons. The Wikipedia page about Le Havre says the city was devastated during the Battle of Normandy. And there's no indication there that it was the British who destroyed their town. In a sense, you could say Le Havre got off lightly. At least some buildings were still standing after the bombing. At Saint-Nazaire, another channel port, the destruction was absolute. 100% of the town was destroyed. That is literally everything. There was nothing left at all at Saint-Nazaire except one structure, which we'll come to shortly. The Germans devised a tactic during the Second World War to attack British and American ships. They used U-boats in a group. It was called Die Rudeltaktik, and a group of U-boats would attack British and American shipping. When they weren't at sea, these U-boats, these submarines, were kept in huge submarine pens, which were like gigantic concrete garages, and there were submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire. The British and Americans both thought it would be a really good idea to destroy the submarines while they were berthed in submarine pens. And so in 1942 they tried to destroy the submarine pens by bombing and using incendiaries. It didn't work. In 1943 the Americans and the British spent 3 days bombing Saint-Nazaire with high explosives and incendiaries. They destroyed the town utterly. Ironically, the only structure which remained after the bombing were the submarine pens themselves. They are so well built that they're still there to this day. These are the submarine pens today at Saint-Nazaire. Both the British and Americans used the bombing of France, as when it was occupied by Germany, as a training ground. There wasn't as much opposition to the bombers by fighters and anti-aircraft guns as there was in Germany itself, and so new crews would be sent over on raids on France as a way of preparing them for what they would face when they flew over Germany. This is what led to the death of over 60,000 people. Obviously you can't drop 500,000 tons of bombs on someone's country without a few people being killed. After the Second World War, the subject of the Allied bombing of France was more or less a taboo subject, but the resentment festered. And it was one of the reasons for Charles de Gaulle's refusal to allow Britain to join the common market, as the European Union was then called. The psychological scars of what Britain and America did to France run very deep in that country. They poison the atmosphere whenever there's a dispute between Britain and France, which is, does happen from time to time. When there are arguments like that about asylum seekers or trade deals after Brexit has been finalised, at the back of French minds is always the thought that we massacred 60,000 French civilians during the war, and it's something that the French are keenly aware of and we hardly even know about.